So the Asteroid City screening is this evening. The new Wes Anderson film has finally made it to Australia. I think it came out in like America and the UK, 2 months ago? I have no idea why it's taken this long to screen here. I am not necessarily the biggest fan of Wes Anderson, in that the only one of his films I really loved was Moonrise Kingdom. His last film, The French Dispatch, I could not stand. It didn't help that I was watching it at an outdoor cinema and it was freezing. So yeah, really hoping that this film tonight will be enjoyable in some way. I've literally seen the trailer so many times because they've pretty much been playing it since it came out in America. However, that trailer doesn't nearly show all of the people that are credited for this film. So hopefully there are some bits that will be surprising and interesting. Either way, the vibes and the aesthetics will be immaculate, so there is always that to enjoy. Obviously we must do a fit check, of course. I felt like this was the most Wes Anderson clothes that I own. A bit of corduroy, a collared polo shirt, perhaps more autumnal than his color palette. He tends to go for more of the summer palette, obviously, but this is just the color of clothing that I own. So I'm very pleased to report that I really enjoyed Asteroid City. I think it might even be my second favourite Wes Anderson film that I have watched so far after Moonrise Kingdom, which I was not expecting. So I'm very happy about that. I really don't know how to explain the plot. Part of the film is kind of a pastiche on a documentary about old Hollywood, or perhaps old Broadway would be a better term, because it is about various people involved with the creation of a play. That bit's all in black and white, and then we see the actual story of the play in a film form, of course, in colour, and that's the bit you mainly see in the trailer. There are so many different characters that we follow in this film, but the main one is played by Jason Schwartzman. He's a father, recently widowed, and has 4 children. The reason they've come to Asteroid City is his oldest son has won a space cadet competition. He, along with some other young people, have created some space technology inventions. And this film is entirely playing off 50s movies, the way the sets are designed and the colour, and just the way that this desert town is depicted on screen is very reminiscent of westerns of the era. There's lots of different aspects that are referencing old 50s Hollywood. Scarlett Johansson is playing a Hollywood starlet, and she is learning her lines for a new film, and those scenes are pretty funny. The way that she talks about acting in her career and the way other people talk about her career as well. It's of course also referencing space movies of the era and kind of the sci-fi of the era as well. And it's kind of nice to remember that science fiction used to be depicted in quite a bright and colourful way compared to often the very dark and serious way that it can be depicted in films these days. And then of course the black and white scenes about mainly Edward Norton, who is the writer of the play, and then Jason Schwartzman is playing the actor who is playing the character in the play. So he kind of has these dual roles that he's playing within the film. That just adds another sort of meta layer of referencing to the whole thing. What really puts me off Wes Anderson films mostly is the stilted way that he gets his actors to perform. I know that's literally his signature thing, but for me it just makes it hard for me to connect with the characters, which is kind of funny considering I'm not necessarily the most animated person in the world. But to me, his characters don't often seem to have understandable motivations or emotions, and the way they're behaving just doesn't ring true to me. Whereas I think why it worked so well in Moonrise Kingdom for me is that it makes more sense that children would act this way. This kind of self-serious and unemotional behavior really suits the two child protagonists in that film, and children often will act that way, especially when they're at that tween age, I think. Like they're kind of pretending to be adults, but they're not really. Moonrise Kingdom was also the first Wes Anderson film I watched as well, so every other film I've seen of his I've been comparing to that one. I have a feeling if I had watched them in a different order, I might have a completely different opinion about his films. And I do kind of want to go back and watch them, having probably watched them about 10 years ago now, as maybe I'll be able to appreciate them more. But what I loved about Asteroid City is it feels like Wes Anderson has relaxed a little bit in terms of that style of performance. They're still very much acting like you would expect Wes Anderson characters to do, but I felt like he was allowing them a little more freedom to be a little bit more diverse and different and unique from each other. I think Jason Schwartzman in particular is really good. He is able to still maintain that kind of stilted style, but you're really understanding the emotions that he is having underneath, and even just the way they spoke and the intonations. It just felt like they were allowed to be a bit more creative and have a bit more freedom. I think as well it really helps that the topic is old Hollywood. It's something that I am really interested in, so I was able to really understand his references and what he was pastiching more than The French Dispatch, for example, which I didn't really understand anything that happened in that film. I just really got swept up in this whole world. I loved the physicality of the sets. Everything felt so hot and dry and dusty, and you really got a communal feeling from all these characters being stuck in this town. I also found the space aspect really fun, which I have a feeling I wouldn't have as much a few years ago or even 1 year ago, but I now work in a science education organization. Not doing the science myself, obviously, doing the communication side. I've always obviously thought science was great and very important, but I think I have a much more greater appreciation of different sciences than I did before, a greater understanding at least, and particularly space, because we have a planetarium and there was an eclipse in April. So space and astronomy has kind of been a big thing recently, and yeah, I think I really understood the wonder and interest that some of these characters have for space and space science much better, because I now know people that are very similar to these characters. I also thought this film was really funny in a much broader way perhaps than I've seen in other Wes Anderson films. There were some proper gags in this that I really love. Yeah, I just think Wes Anderson really struck the balance so well in this film. He's maintaining his style and he's maintaining his aesthetic, but he's really opening it up and exploring ways that he can allow his actors to instill more of their personalities in it, I think, which I really love. And of course, there are so many good actors in this film. I particularly loved Edward Norton and Adrian Brody in the black and white sections. It also helps that this is one of the few films that doesn't have Bill Murray in it, because I really don't like Bill Murray. I find him really annoying. I don't find him funny at all. Instead, we have Tom Hanks, who has not been in a Wes Anderson film before, and he is so well suited to Wes Anderson's style. He's really good in this film, and he's such a strong character himself that he instills his own sensibilities within the character in the film in a really nice way. I'm just so pleased that I liked it, because so many people love Wes Anderson, and I've always felt like I wish I could join in, because theoretically they're exactly the kind of films that I should like. Certainly at uni I was constantly reblogging Moonrise Kingdom gift sets on Tumblr. The aesthetic was exactly everything I dreamed of when I was at that age. I think that just made me not liking his other films just so much more disappointing, but I'm glad I can be back on the Wes hype train again. So I have some other films to review as well, but I didn't like any of them particularly, so we'll try and get through them quickly, because I hate having to talk negatively about films. But if they're going to keep making shitty films, what am I supposed to do? So these two actually came out last week in Australia. Firstly, we have The Miracle Club, which stars so many famous women that it should have been a great time, but it was not. This is an Irish film with Maggie Smith, Kathy Bates and Laura Linney, none of whom are Irish. It's set in the 1960s and it's about these women living in a small town, and then Laura Linney comes back from America, where she's been living for the past like 20 years, 30 years, something like that. These Irish women for some reason really want to go to this place in France where they think that there is like miracle water that can cure them. Laura Linney decides to join them, even though none of them like her very much, because the only reason she has come back to Ireland is because her mother died and she needed to go to the funeral. This is a film that has some really good intentions. It's trying to talk about women in the 60s finding more liberation for themselves, women dealing with a lot of Catholic guilt. You have these whole scenarios where their husbands don't want them to leave to go to France. They go anyway, and while they're in France, you have various scenes with the husbands not coping very well with having to look after the household and the children, and it's played as kind of comedy, but also like, oh wow, finally the men are learning a lesson, how important these women are in their lives. But it's just a little bit cheap and basic. Kind of undercuts the seriousness of what it would have actually been like to be living in that era, I think. The whole time it feels like there's going to be this really big revelation about Laura Linney's character, because you don't really find out a lot about her. And there never really is. Like, what is revealed is kind of obvious. All the actors are trying their best. Obviously, they're really good actors, but the script is just way too lacking in substance to be able to make anything out of it. But what really threw me is that Laura Linney and Kathy Bates are meant to be playing characters of the same age or a similar age. And Kathy Bates is born in 1948 and Laura Linney is born in 1964, which, if my calculations are correct, means they're 16 years apart in real life. And it was just so unbelievable. Kathy Bates is just visibly so much older than Laura Linney. And I never understand why filmmakers do this. It just completely drags you out of the film. As much as you might want those actors in those roles, it just doesn't make any sense, because you lose all your sense of disbelief, which is literally the point of the film. So that one was not very good. And then another film that came out last week is Chevalier. This is a true story and should have been such an interesting film. It's about a black French violinist from the 1700s, well, whenever Marie Antoinette was around, who was the Chevalier to the Queen, which I didn't really understand what that meant, but he's a very talented violinist, and he was the son of a plantation owner from the Caribbean whose mother was a slave. His father notices that he has this incredible musical talent, so his father takes him to France and puts him in the finest music school there is. Despite obviously growing up with a lot of prejudice against him, he eventually does become this amazing violinist and becomes part of the upper class society. And the film depicts how he wanted to be the head of the opera in Paris. However, there is this other guy who people deem as more suitable because he is more experienced and also white. And so the Queen decides that they should have a competition to write an opera, and the best person will get to be the head of the opera. There's also an opera singer played by Samara Weaving. Her husband does not want her to be part of the opera, however, she just kind of does it behind his back, and of course starts a love affair with Chevalier as well. Reading the actual history is so fascinating. It's not a person who I've ever heard talked about before. It's one of those real hidden history type things, and this guy eventually becomes a huge part of the French Revolution as well. Only that side of it is told in text at the end of the film, which seems like such a shame, because I feel like that would have been maybe more interesting than the parts of his life that they actually showed. I didn't think it was a terrible film. I thought it was entertaining enough, but it has that real feeling of trying to be big budget on a small budget. The costumes are all very magnificent, and the places that they are filming in are these amazing, I presume maybe real buildings or maybe sets, but there are just other things that really drew me out of the film, like the way the women all wear these really bright shades of lipstick that just did not seem like they would be period accurate. I mean, maybe they are, but it came across as very unnatural to me for the period. There's also a lot of obvious CGI backgrounds as well. I also think it's just a really basically written film, and the actors are unfortunately not strong enough to really do anything with the little that they're given. Kelvin Harrison Jr. plays the main character. You also have Lucy Boynton as Marie Antoinette and Samara Weaving, as I mentioned, and they're all good actors, but they just don't have strong enough personalities in this film to make their characters really shine. One person who I did think was really good is an actor called Alex Fitzalan. He plays a friend to Chevalier, and he's very much caught up in the French Revolution as well. And perhaps it's just because I know that he's Australian that I thought he did a really good job at playing this kind of classic British male character that you see in period dramas a lot. He did a really good job at the accent, and perhaps that's also compared to Samara Weaving, who I don't think they were forcing anyone to do particular accents. Like, everyone's kind of being British, but Kelvin Harrison Jr. still has an American twang, and Samara Weaving is kind of being posh Australian in a weird way, which makes me wonder why they made Alex Fitzalan be British. If Samara Weaving's doing her Australian accent, why not let him do it as well? But anyway, I just thought he was very good, and added a bit of character into the story. Also, the actor who plays Samara Weaving's husband looks so much like Russell Crowe. And then I looked him up and he's actually from New Zealand like Russell Crowe is, which I personally found very amusing. It's a real shame that this film is a bit lacking because I think the story is so fascinating and deserves a really good film about it. And then the last film that came out this week is called Gran Turismo. This is based on a marketing strategy from Nissan, and you can just imagine the marketing people sitting in a boardroom coming up with the idea that is depicted in the film and also thinking, if this works out, this will make a great movie. But it is about this scheme that Nissan came up with to get players of a computer game, Gran Turismo, which is a car racing game, and get them to race real cars. Jan Mardenborough is a British, well, he's basically a teenager at the beginning of the film. Turns out he is actually very good at racing cars, despite having only done it virtually and barely being able to drive just a regular car. So he, along with David Harbour, who plays a man who used to be a racing driver and is now working as a mechanic, and also Orlando Bloom, who is a Nissan marketing person, they enter Jan into various racing competitions because he has to race so many to get like an official license or something. This is such an odd film. It's one of those films that's so confusingly made that it ends up being quite funny. The amount of times they cut to Orlando Bloom just doing something weird with his face. My friend and I were cackling the whole way through the film and probably annoying the people sitting next to us because it felt like everyone else in the cinema was taking it all very seriously. Some of the editing, the music choices, it feels like a film that's trying to do everything at once. It wants to be funny and entertaining, but it wants to take itself really seriously. I mean, it is a pretty amazing story, even if it was created by a marketing team, in that you could actually get someone who's only played a video game to be a really good racing driver. I personally am very against car racing, of course, because it must be one of the most wasteful sports ever in terms of like the actual waste that it creates and the car emissions. But I will say that the actual car racing sequences are very well done. And there's one bit where Jan gets into an accident and it's one of the most horrific things I've seen on screen. It's so shocking when it happens and there's no build up to it either. You just see it happen right in front of you. But it's also hard to feel sympathy with people who purposely put themselves in cars and drive really fast, because what do you expect? You're going to have an accident. The film is definitely helped by the fact that the main actor, he's pretty good. David Harbour just looks angry to be there, and as I said, who knows what Orlando Bloom is doing, but I don't think he's ever been a great actor. His whole thing was looking pretty when he was younger, and he still is quite pretty, so I guess it still works. But yeah, as I said, it's just very confusingly written. The tonal changes within the film create so much whiplash. There's a girlfriend character inserted into the plot. Perhaps she was a real person, but it's so unnecessary. They really could have cut out every one of her scenes and the rest of the film would be completely unaffected. And it's really hard to get away from the fact that this just feels like the completion of a marketing plan for Nissan. I just have no doubt that create feature film was like this last bit on their list when they were coming up with this whole thing. And it does make it hard to take the film seriously. So in conclusion, Asteroid City is a fun film, and if you live in Australia, go see it in the cinema. If you live elsewhere, I think it's already out on DVD. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.